Oh. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another awesome show for you today. We got Mr. Seb here, not coming in on a Monday, coming in on Saturday, straight from UCLA. No big, right?
Seb, did you hear me? It would have been an IG live chat I did several days ago. And I said words to the effect of, well, it's not Seb Lavoie Monday. It's another random day of the week. And what Seb doesn't realize is he's being tractor beamed in. Were you there for that chance?
I
Did you hear
wasn't,
me
no,
chirp
but
about that?
I was there. I was laughing. I was like, oh, yes.
Oh,
Here
yes.
we go.
Oh, yes.
I can't
2
keep
days a
track.
week, then 3
2
days a
days.
week.
Nope, it's 3 days a week this week. Nope, next week it's 4.
Actually, the joke's on you because I'm having a blast being here. So,
Dude, that's great. It's good to have you over here, of course.
It
Awesome.
really is. And I mean, really, if anybody wants to see more of Seb, you can always hit the like button. You can subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification bell. You can do all that stuff. Also, if you have any comments, you got any questions, hit them in the comment section. We read them and we'll actually get them back to you. So make sure you do that.
That was
we read
butter.
all.
That was smooth. One of your
Coming
smoothest
in.
ones.
I'm dialing
Want
it
to
in.
see
Not
less
bad.
of me unsubscribed.
Not bad.
There is that too. Or like look for the posters ahead of time and be like, Seb's here. No, I'm not going to show up for that one. But either way, we got lots of topics. Anything off top of your guys' head? Anything you want to distract? Anything you want to debrief from where you are right now or talk about?
I can do it quick. I mean,
let's hit it.
I'm here with the Global Counterterrorism Institute in essentially a women's insecurity event. And, it's funny because as I was posting the posters this week about the Women in Security event, I had lots of comments speaking to, wow, there sure is a lot of males for a Women in Security event. And I think thinking that the problems that are encountered in a security field by women are going to be fixed solely by women is a absolute fallacy. We need to work together. Good men need to step up and women need to work alongside them. And we need to work together. So it's proven to be a very beneficial event with a lot of great speakers. And it was the first year, so it's quite low attendance. We have some virtual attendances as well, but we're also networking with several doctors from several different fields, speaking about certain things. So it's been really interesting. It's been a good thing. So I was supposed to present today from 2 to 5, but my presentation is theoretically 3 hours long and it's quite intense. And so I asked to be pushed to tomorrow morning as the first presentation of the day instead of trying to keep these guys, work twice as hard for them to potentially miss a lot of the information that is, in my opinion, quite critical. So tomorrow morning I'll be running my 3-hour presentation.
Nice. Hopefully everyone eats very small breakfasts so that they're not all carb comed.
And you can always just get them to jump up and start doing burpees. I mean,
there's a lot of ex-military people, so I'm sure they wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, just immediately hit it up. We got a great question. I did have one question about the conference before we jump into the comment here, but it seems kind of silly to not utilize the skill sets around you, right? So to say that either I like how you put that when you said that, to think that the only problems that women in security are going to solve are by women. That seems silly to me. Is there a lot of that mentality in the security world, like of just kind of stay to your own side?
Well, I think when it comes to, without censoring myself outright, I think that if you're trying to problem solve anything and you're doing it with the people that are having the issues only, like how can you maximize and optimize changing things, being a change agent? Because we can have this conversation all day within the confines of a room, but if we don't have either buy-in by some people on the inside, so to speak, that can really help us drive some of those changes, or if we're trying to change internally, but we go outside, and the people with whom we're having issues are not up to speed on whatever the case may be, how are you expecting to change things really drastically? So what needs to happen is essentially a collaborative approach. You have your strong men supporters of women in security, which they should be, and you have women in security, which are very capable. And now you bring those two together, and we address the outliers, because that's really what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Shaun, you got any thoughts on that?
I do.
Dive
And
into it.
I was gonna try not to say it because I know it can be a little contentious. And I spoke a little bit about it this morning in my live IG chat in respect to it. This month, June, is Men's Mental Health Month. And I said that I was going to try to speak a little bit more about it as a general thematic push this month, at least on my IG chats. And I was hoping that we'd do it a little bit over here as well, just as we did with Shane Wenzel yesterday. So when you were saying, are there any topics out there that we could talk about? I was going to try to direct us towards men's specific mental health issues this month. And so, Seb, you'd said something there that I know the words that you were choosing, you weren't choosing them to target any specific demographic, or you weren't pointedly stating something that you were trying to call a group out or whatever the case is. But here's what I heard. And so you'd said that people are making comment that seems like an awful lot of men in the security in that event for it to be about women, perhaps. And all I thought was this: well, it's probably not men that are saying that to Seb. Like, it's probably not men saying there's too many men there, because any men that have been in the security game know how the game is run. And so there's not too many men there. In fact, it's almost insulting for anyone to say that there's too many men there, particularly on Men's Mental Health Month. And so I hear a statement like that, and this is what it makes me think. Why is it that someone has so much bias towards men that they feel that they have to select a gender to state that there's too many of it in it to do the job well? That's what I kind of inferred at a very high level. I know that's not what you said, but I hear it a lot out in social commentary, and maybe that's something that we can talk about. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it transcends women in security. It goes through all subsets of society. If you look at it, every time there is an issue, whether it be with a certain demographics or with a certain group or whatever the case may be, there is a propensity to want to isolate and make everybody the enemy. And this is not everybody, obviously. I'm not saying that everybody does that, but it is a collective, a seemingly easy collective course of action, and it's very destructive and it's very counterproductive. If it's a subject or a contention or a situation that's very emotionally loaded, it gets to be even worse, that polarization. And so it's kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Quite simply, it's like, no, yes, there is a problem here, and we can all see it. That includes men in the field. It includes women in the field. So now you get them together to problem solve the issue. Not let's isolate from men because men are the enemy, so to speak. But I will speak to, I guess. I don't know. That's really, really sensitive. But
it's the whole subject is.
But there is certain things that can happen in certain in gender relations that can make things almost impossible to remove the emotions from, right? So I can't sit here and be like, I want you to sort of logically override this and have a conversation with, because it's some of those identified issues, not necessarily in the security field, but when we start talking about, like severe harassment, like sexual in nature, like those types of things, it's like, oh man, like that's a difficult subject because
and they're long-standing.
Oh, of course they are.
It's a massive bowl of complex soup that has been stirred for decades, and hardly anyone's tasting it. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do right now is openly talk about these kind of things without, upsetting anyone or without upsetting ourselves, but just acknowledge that these are issues that are occurring that very few are being transparent about.
100%. And my biggest contention for me is the insidious sometimes behaviors by certain people with respect to the opposite gender, like just for example, like sexual harassment, for example, is one of the best example of this, and we've seen it in the jiu-jitsu world at times, where and some instructors somewhere will have a woman come over to be a UK, so to speak, and there's like 8 guys in there, and it can be very insidious to the point where you can look at it from the outside and be like, well, is there really something there or is there not? But the woman herself actually knows exactly what's going on, because she feels it. She feels what's happening. So now you're having a conversation about something that really is a part of the game, so to speak, in the sense that you're going to have to make physical contact. You're going to have to make, do certain things. But now you start looking at the insidious nature of that. How has that happened in the first place, in the sense that, does this need to be a woman? And if it is, are those positions need to be had? Do you have to place your hands there when you do certain things? So I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but I think what's important to recognize as men is that there is a lot more of that we ever give it credit for. And that creates an incredible emotionally charged life, and then it's going to be very difficult after to say, okay, let's logically override this and bring men and women together. So an example of this would be, say, Hurricane Katrina, for example. A lot of people don't know this. Hurricane Katrina, everybody's familiar with the lootings, everybody's familiar with a bunch of things that happened, but very few people know that 30,000 women were sexually assaulted. Like, just an opportunity, now that it's lawlessness, to do
was
that.
Crazy time.
It's insane.
Mhm.
Like, that's completely insane. And so I think, but it's important for women out there to understand that there is a lot of good men. There is a lot of good men, and those good men need to be vocal. They need to be a part of the solution. They need to be responsible to keep other men in check if there is a crossing the line that occurs. But what they also need to understand is most men that act a certain way with women do not portray the same persona with men, because they know it wouldn't fly.
Yeah, it wouldn't fly.
So a lot of the times we don't know what's actually occurring. So it's important for us either to be filled in or to really have our eyes open, so that we can actually pick up on the subtleties, right? And I've done that on the mats before, picking up on somebody having a little too much fun with the roll, and it was a total call out immediately, right?
Yeah.
And so just, we all need to kind of like, take a step back, detach, find solutions and collaborative approach to try to problem solve some of those things. Guys have to be keeping guys that are stepping off in line. There is no other way. Like, we have to do that. Like, we can't be like, oh, this is kind of funny. No, it's not, because it's very insidious right now that guy is joking and making certain statements. But the problem is if it garnishes some laughters or anything, then it reinforces the behavior that's an acceptable behavior that can be now crossed over to relationship with women, if that makes any sense.
It does. And it ties directly into what, Chance, we were talking about the other day, and well, it was a couple 3 days ago, whatever the case is, where it was the reference made to, well, let's just glass this place.
Yeah.
And the guy who'd said that, immediately I stated, what? I'm locking eyes with that guy and saying, say what? You said what? That's not even funny, bro. So, it's our job to call these kind of moments out, and not just call them out, but without saying a freaking word. We're supposed to be the standard. We are supposed to lead by example without saying a word. And using the example of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on the mats with men and women, it is an art that teaches you to be comfortable with all humans. And so if you're rolling with guys, guess what? You're not as comfortable with guys as you think you are if you've never done BJJ before. You're about to get a whole lot more comfortable with being close to another man. And if you're not good with that, well, guess what? You should be good with it. Get good with it, because that's what we're all supposed to be, is good with being close with and in contact with other human beings, not miles away from each other, but shoulders touching shoulders. That's how we started as a species. And so there's a lot of people who aren't used to being close to other men as a man, and certainly not with other women as a man. But there should be no distinction between the two, and yet there is. But the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mats will teach you how to manage those circumstances over a period of time. So eventually, like it is for me now and has been for a long time, I see no difference from guy to girl. I'm having fun. I'm having fun. I'm playing. We're talking. We're doing. That's how I see it nowadays. But when I first started out, that was not the case, because society hadn't taught me how to be really comfortable with both sexes in that much close contact.
I think it goes to say, like, a lot of it is, it's not societally driven, but it is, you know, men and women have had very separate roles for a very long time. And it's only been recently, in the last 50 some odd years, that we have been put in really close proximity for a very long time. So, I mean, I'm thinking 100 years ago, you might, you know, be engaged with other women, but there would always be a chaperone around, right? There would always be someone there. And I was watching the show Bridgerton with my wife, and it was kind of hilarious. But it goes to show a lot of the old school points.
Not hilarious.
Well, no. What was the funny thing was that I was looking at it from a point of view of, there were standards of behavior, and everybody knew them. Now, how ridiculous the show is, that's besides the point. But those standards were, again, as to both your statements, they were enforced by the people, right? And it was the good, upstanding man that was, you know, doing all the things properly, that would keep the other people in check. Now, was there rampant there's examples of going over the line across the board throughout history, right? That is what it is. And unfortunately, I think we are also at the point now where we have to be able to accept and move, right? It's, again, very similar to jiu-jitsu, is,
well,
if you get into a bad position.
Unfortunate.
What do you mean?
Well, you said unfortunately we are.
Yes,
There's
correct.
nothing unfortunate about
You're right.
that.
Absolutely. There's nothing unfortunate about that. Actually, fortunately, we are of the ability that we can actually engage this subject now, rather than pushing it off another decade or another 2 decades or whatever. We actually have that ability to do so. So I think that's, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I had a image kind of click in my head when you were talking about having too many men at a women's security council. And I was thinking about the conversation between leg lockers and not, right? Why would you ignore 50% of the body? Why would you ignore 70 or 80% of the security world, the field, in order to solve problems? That doesn't seem to make sense. And it goes into the additional argument to what you were saying, Shaun, was the fact that in men's mental health, it also doesn't need to be just men solving the problem, right? It needs to be all of us together, collaboratively, trying to solve the problem. At least that's right. My belief.
I just think those two things are they're similar, but they're also different in the sense that the biggest problem that men have had over the mental health issues has been stigmatization, has been historical. You know, if you're a man, you don't cry. If you're a man, you don't live your emotions. If you're a man, you whatever. So those were societal norms for a long, long time. And I think, yes, women can always help us, but we need to speak to other men, and men of influence need to speak to other men so that other men feel comfortable doing the things that they need to do to make themselves better. So that's actually almost completely independent from women. When they take the steps, women will come in to help. You know what I mean? So that's why that men's mental health is important, in the sense that we need to address other men of influence need to address other men, you know?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah, but holding that standard, right? I think that's the key. Now, We do have a question here. Do you guys any further thoughts on that before we?
Just one more little
Yeah,
piece, and it
by all
kind of
means.
dials the rotary dial up, maybe just a bit too intense, but I'm going to do it for a reason, just to set the possibility of the near future. I've been listening to a few guys, and these are friends or acquaintances, and thematically it's along these lines. And I'm going to paraphrase it all, distill it right down into my own words so that I'm establishing a timeline. It's a recent phenomenon that men have been getting beaten up by the entire species, by other men, by women, by themselves, whatever the case is.
Mhm.
It's recent that we're getting beaten up. 20 years ago, I don't think we were getting beaten up as bad as we are getting beaten up right now. And I'm hearing from a lot of guys that they're feeling beaten up, man. They're feeling like the species is against them. And I can see, I mean, if you really are paying attention, you can see the phenomenon. And it's been going on for probably a handful of years. And it's not cool, of course. It's not cool if the tables were turned, if women were feeling this way 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, or 40 years from now, whatever the case is. None of it's cool. And so as men, I'm hearing it from guys, I'm seeing it. It's our job to do something about it. And we can't turn our back on the fact that it's happening. And it's not to such a degree right now where it is really causing a lot of harm. But it's causing enough harm right now that I think that we have to kind of start talking about not running a counter program against it, but just moving forward out away from this phenomenon of almost an insidious negativity generally brushed against the male species. And I don't know, we got to figure something out for sure.
Yeah. So my biggest contention, and I'm gonna be that guy, and I really don't care, because I think it's critically important that we have that conversation. There is some historical basis to some of the claims, historical claims on how certain groups or certain people were treated by certain people, but none of those people are alive, and none of those people that were mistreated are alive, right? And so, yes, we do. There is a subset that's still around, and there is discrimination in all fields: gender-based, race-based, religion-based, freaking fat-based. As far as I can, there's a lot of reasons to aggravate another subset of society. I'm going out and saying that, for me, I have seen, white men, more or so than just male. It's
True.
white men that are getting it the worst right now. And so there's always the argument about, yes, but historically, it's like, yeah, but historically, the generation of white men that's here right now isn't them. So you can't just bleed on everybody along the way on account
Forever.
No, I mean, and so let's transpose this from male dominated field, and let's talk about something else that's very contentious, which I totally support. The treatment, say, of Indigenous by police, say the RCMP specifically, back in like obviously 100 years ago type deal.
Society as a whole at that time.
It was, so that's my point. Everybody's acting like the RCMP was the problem. It's like those were elected political officials, supported and elected by the people, supported in their endeavor. If anybody in the community stepped up and said, this is unacceptable, we do not want this for our Indigenous people, what do you think the government would have done? Exactly what the government always does. They want to remain in power, so therefore they would have done whatever the crowd and the populace would have wanted.
It's a reflection of the people.
Sure, it is. And so now you have an organization that certainly has its blame in that. The population isn't without sin. Political power to be, environment, all social political factor of the time notwithstanding, you are now looking at this through the lens of somebody that's never done anything wrong, and you're like, look at what they did. It's like, whoa, hold on. If I say, as an active RCMP member, can be faulted for the sins of people 100 years ago, so can you as a civilian that supported that government, right? And so it's not about not making the changes necessary to make things better, because that is a critical piece. You can never repeat this. You cannot, as a society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But that deflection and that victim mentality is extremely counterproductive. It's extremely counterproductive because it allows one subset of society to actually have the ability to feel better about themselves because they're virtue signaling, but they actually haven't done anything for or against anything other than virtue signaling, and further victimizing another subset of society that wasn't even born at the time of those events. You got to be really careful when you start throwing rocks in glass houses like this.
100%. There's a lot to that, and it's you can it's to apply modern standards to try to moral standards to apply what is going on right now to past events doesn't make any sense.
Well, they're not
Right.
even standards.
They're not like they're just
It's
thoughts,
a
really, and-
person looking at a muddy situation in the past through a sterile lens that they're holding in front of their eye and having some thoughts based on whatever maybe little experience they've got, flipping a coin, choosing a side, and then yelling it. I mean, it's not very well thought out. These are not standards. It's just personal opinions that sometimes aren't even based in reality.
And they absolve themselves from all responsibility by doing so. That lens they're looking through is a one-way lens where they can see it through and see everybody's sins, but there's no reflection upon themselves. And
it's a clean lens looking at everyone else's dirt.
everybody else has screwed up. But when we're looking at it as a society, this is where problems will get solved. What did we do as a populace to enable this? What did the police do in response to the orders given that needs to be addressed and needs to be changed? What did political power to be do to make this happen, to enable this? What is, all those things? We need to be looking at all those things, and everybody in there needs to take actions to prevent this from ever reoccurring again. It's not a pointing the finger at you and you and you. And so in line with this, you have the reverse discrimination thing. Reverse discrimination isn't a fix to discrimination. Get that out of your head. Get that out of your head. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't, and it shouldn't. Morally, it's absolutely wrong. And so we can't do that, especially not with people that had nothing to do with what happened before.
Yeah,
that's even worse.
It's a poor approach because it infuriates both parties. And through that infuriation, it drives a greater divide between the two parties, whichever party you're in, the left or the right or the up or the down on the subject of the day. The more that you try to reverse discriminate, the wider that wedge.
Well, yeah. If somebody hits me and I hit them back, now we both hurt, right? Great. What have we solved? And I mean that in a very metaphorical way. I don't mean a physical thing, because
I'm usually looking down at them on the sidewalk.
Exactly. Yeah. That's old.
But this is a different scenario, Chance. In my opinion, this is a different scenario. If the person that does the hitting gets hit back on the spot, that's addressed right away. But imagine if the person that hits you doesn't get anything and you hit their grandson.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That's a better analogy. Yeah. Thank you.
That's legit.
Yeah. So the sad part is, and this is, I can't say sad, but it's a contentious issue. It's a little difficult, but when you look at it, these types of concepts of reverse discrimination or anything like that, is that it's really easy to allow the thoughts to dictate the morality, right? And I say this because the Holocaust was perfectly legal, right? It was at the time. And you can look back on that and say, well, the German people were in league with it. I'm sure lots of them were. But the German people now can't be held accountable directly for 2-3 generations ago. It's just, you can't do it. I can't sit here and say I hate all German people because of whatever. Because I'm not directly affected by it. like both of my grandparents that actually experienced any of the stuff back in the day, they're both gone. So I have no direct link to it anymore.
Yeah, but indirectly you're impacted.
I'm indirectly impacted, sure, but I can't then directly impact someone else because of
Yeah,
the indirect impact.
Yeah, you
I
can,
can't.
and people do. And the only reason that people don't is if they're intentionally controlling those things.
Okay, that's a good point.
And so, if no one's ever stood in a concentration camp in Germany and looked around, thought of the horror, if the only sense of history you've got is a dusty old history book and that's your idea of horror, well, I'd encourage you to go stand in a concentration camp. It'll make it far more real and it'll make it far more contentious.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to dismiss something that's half a page in a history book and say, whatever, this is how I want to run my life. It changes when you're standing in the actual world, seeing actual history. And that's a moment that a lot of people don't get to experience. The reality of the big world around us, they sometimes only see a sentence or two on the subject and feel that their sentence or their two sentences are right because they read it somewhere online or in a book or whatever the case is. Without much thought, they've determined their entire trajectory on the subject to include everyone else around them who will be in earshot or nearby that they can inform that the Holocaust didn't happen, as an example. And so human beings are we're an interesting species. And these issues that we have currently in the past and will have in the future, most of them are solved when we communicate.
Yeah.
And I would add to this, Shaun, you said they don't get to experiences. I say they choose not to experience this.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it makes them a victim
Agreed.
of not knowing things. It's like, no, you're not a victim of this. You could have went to Europe and experienced certain things, but you preferred to go to Hawaii, and that's totally cool. But
It's cool.
But then if you're going to be having a strong opinion about certain things, you better have been around and seen the world, because ethnocentrism is real and everything else associated with it is destructive in trying to understand the world around you. You're going to create a sanitized version of the world. And that's a very dangerous place to be. And again, it falls in line with the virtue signaling piece. And that is absolutely counterproductive. But it makes people feel better about themselves in relation to their position in the
because you got a deep understanding of Dole pineapples, while you're in Hawaii. It's cool. You don't have to give it much thought. But I'll tell you what, when you're over in Germany and you're facing these things, you better put on your thinking hat, because you're going to be thinking about things. And here's a harsh reality for anyone, again, who hasn't been over there and stood in those kind of horrors. The entire German population is still impacted by it.
Yeah.
We talk about, contentious issues having impact in the future. The next generation of Germans and the generation after that are still being impacted in the future. They don't even know it, but we all know it in the present. All you got to do is go over there and talk to the German population, and they still hold a certain sense of shame generationally over what occurred. And it's tough, man, because they're carrying the sins of the past of people that they've never met. And it resides in us at a deeper level that sometimes you've just got to stand in it to understand that you can't escape these kind of things without thinking deeply and getting right with the moment, and not absolving yourself of everything, but facing up to history, facing up to reality. And before you speak non-factually about the world around you, get involved in the world so that you can gather some facts.
Yeah, go ahead, Chance.
Okay, I was just going to say that this is it's a very personal issue, and it's a very societal issue, right? It when we go back to men's mental health and we go back to all the things we've talked about so far, it really is, as Shaun just said, you have to stand in it and go, yep, we screwed up.
We
And
blew
we have
it.
to really like sit in that for a little while and then go, okay, how can we do it better? And then not even how can we do it better? How can I do it better?
Exactly.
Every single one of us has to do that. And if every one of us can do it, man, like that's when we're going to see the societal shift. That's when we're going to see all that. And it's really just sitting in it. And there's a comment here from Daniel that I just want to hit on because it's absolutely perfect. He says, the silence you feel when in a concentration camp is something. Went to the one where Anne Frank and her sister died. And this is, I've never been to one.
Man.
I really, it's one of my all-time places to go see, just to kind of attach with it, but I can only imagine.
Mhm.
It is, but that's, and it should feel like this. That's the thing I think that we don't quite understand is that when you screw up bad enough as a person, if you screw up bad enough, you're going to have to deal with those consequences. And as a society, if you screw up bad enough to do something as horrific as that, we're going to have to manage the consequences, and you're going to have to sit in it and be like, yeah, this sucks and figure out a way out of it. Because there's no way out by pointing fingers at anybody else.
Deflection.
Sorry, go ahead, Seb.
Yeah, I was just going to say deflection does not fix anything. Quite to the contrary, because the person that being deflected to are deflecting to others.
Yep.
So nobody is actually taking ownership. Problems get solved when ownership is taken over things. And I'm not suggesting that I'm going to, I have to take ownership as an individual of the sins of 3 generations back, but I have to take ownership of the solution. I have to take ownership of the proliferation of the information. I have to take ownership of the things that are going to prevent it from reoccurring. That's the ownership that I have.
Yeah, it's that classic case of cognitive dissonance where we know what's going on around us, but we're trying to pretend that it's not going on around us. And with Men's Mental Health Month, if we are kidding ourselves that the external world is really dialed into men's mental health, and we're spinning the line in our head that the entire species is invested in this month for men's mental health, and we know that that isn't the case. You don't feel right. You don't feel right deep inside. And how deep? Well, if you don't feel right, then go stand in a concentration camp and you'll understand what don't feel right feels like. And that feeling should never leave you. I use it as my baseline of this ain't right. And so if you have those feelings inside of you and you don't know what to call them, start paying attention to how an emotion will synchronize with an external event and feel like, oh, that's what that emotion is. And it could be, you see, it's going to sound terrible, but you see a car crash, you're driving past a car crash and you feel that feeling. And that feeling feels like something you've been feeling for 2 years. And finally, you get to give it a name of dread or fear or horror or whatever the case is. Those kind of feelings within you, once you can give them names or you can give them an identity, you can start working against them rather than just feeling a ambiguous or a ephemeral sort of dread, as it were.
Yeah, that goes in line with everything we've always preaching, Shaun, which is take the mirror, put it right in front of your face, and don't look away until you know exactly what you are looking at. And I think it's a very unpopular thing. And if you are associating negative emotions with that, it gets even less popular. Everybody, and at the end of the day, most people are looking to not be hurt as opposed to living, right?
Yeah.
So it's more about, and if you look at, let's make a metaphorical segue with MMA fighters. All the fighters you've ever known that were fighting to not be hurt were never as exciting, or as successful as those that went in for the love of the sport, that addressed all their weaknesses, that did, all the things they needed to do in order
Who
to
saw their full potential.
Sure, exactly. And
Yeah.
optimized it. It starts with identifying. And once it's done, so self-awareness, and now that self-regulation piece. How do I fix this? And if I don't know, who can help me? Who knows what I don't know?
Yeah. Goes right back.
One of the things going back to the men's mental health week. So last I believe a couple days ago, you had a live going on, and there was quite a conversation about men's mental health, and there was a point that was made that I wanted to go back to just a little bit. There was a point that was made, and I think it was Rob Murray that made it. Essentially, something about either not trusting, people that haven't suffered an emotional
Right.
mental injuries as much as we have to be very, very careful with this, because this is how I look at things. You either suffer before through some severe adversity, and it creates an increased capacity to deal with certain things, or you suffer after because you haven't had that happen. But one way or another, you're suffering at some point. So you can't look at someone and say, well, that person hasn't suffered occupational stress injury. That's because that person's life was utterly miserable, right? And it's not necessarily like inverse. It's not necessarily correlated so simplistically. But what I am saying is, don't think that because somebody doesn't experience a diagnosed occupational stress injury, that there is no repercussions of the mental health side of the thing that preceded their career or during. Like it's easy to write people off and say, well, if you haven't been there, I don't listen to you. But it's not how we should be doing things, for sure.
Though, and I agree. And the nuance of these kind of conversations are critical.
Sure.
And so everyone just gets such interesting little lives, man. We all go on these little journeys, and it's ups and downs and ins and outs, and sometimes it's like the worst and sometimes it's the best, and they're all so unique. And so anyone who, it's that classic case of pay now or pay later, we all have to pay. And so it's a matter of when you pay and how much you pay and what you learned when you paid. And there's so much complexity and nuance to this topic that it's every month I learn how much more nuanced and complex it is. And the challenge just seems to get bigger, not smaller, when you look at it closer.
No, absolutely. And if I look at if you take one's career, so say my 20-year career, the things that I dealt with the most are the things that didn't affect me. Whereas if somebody goes somewhere and has something that's an incredible trigger right off the hop, this is a matter of luck. You have nothing to do with that at all. You know what I mean? Like I don't. Like, you have nothing in the context of policing, for example, and same with the military. I mean, you have the entire framework around the fact that yes, you are at risk for this to occur by the nature of your duties. But what happens specifically to you that will have a very deep impact, even if it's a bunch of events, that's luck of the draw, my friend.
Dude, I mean, really,
nice.
who knows, right?
100%.
For any of us.
So for people that are, say, because right now there is a thing where the people that are not suffering from an occupational stress injury are wondering if there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, why not me?
Yeah.
Precisely. And it's like, no, that's not how this works.
That's
like,
right.
Where the line needs to be drawn is if you think you're above the potential for occupational stress injury, I got some news for you. Don't confuse your luck with what and or the capacity to sustain the things that you have seen in a specific context, or the things that you are capable of handling, versus something that happens that's completely left field that would be your trigger that simply never happened to you, right? And so it's one of those things again.
Yeah, it's also how you interpret the event in the event itself, which is a whole other thing on top of that. Go ahead, John.
And there's the time delay hand grenade, of course, which is called 12.74 years from now, or whatever random number that this thing is going to kick off. The thing that you didn't think you would ever be impacted by, whatever that small thing was that built itself up into a big thing over 12.74 years. Surprise. There isn't a person, or at least there isn't a man that I've ever met that hasn't been impacted to some degree by something in their past.
Absolutely.
And the tragedy is that maybe we haven't been encouraging ourselves enough to talk with other men like we are right now to reduce some of the tragedy that we're starting to see happen more and more frequently, of course.
Did you see Jeff Bosley posted something about another Green Beret taking his own life?
Yep.
And of
Saw that
course,
this morning.
Of course, we had Pistol Pete taking his life a couple weeks ago here, and
Yeah.
I mean, guys, man, you know, it's difficult. I realize that if you're struggling and if you're at a point where you've actually let yourself make the decision that your life was no longer worth living, the chances of you reaching out are incredibly low.
Yep.
And I get it. What needs to happen is long before that, is long before you reach that point. There has to be actions taken. And one of the problems is nobody's coming to save you. Nobody is, but there will be a million people there to save you if you're taking a difficult step, which is who am I reaching to and who can I trust in this specific scenario? And if you're, you know, yeah, it's super tragic to see the numbers exponentially increase because they have the states as well, and I think we're seeing it across the board. And some's got to change. Obviously, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing all over again and expecting a different outcome, and it isn't. We're not going to have a different outcome. We've been telling men for 15, 20 years, reach out if you need help. There's two major problems with that. When you're at that point, it's now too late. So it needs to be a preemptive action. We need to address it differently. And then second, if they actually do reach out, our system is completely broken. So that is extremely difficult. I told you, Shaun, about this story, this amazing woman that was a elite firefighter in the Bataclan theater attack in 2015. An amazing human. She was, you know, at the end of her role, and I convinced her to go seek help, and I had to fight for 14 hours with everybody along the way to try to explain what service-related operational injury are, how she should be addressed, even the little subtlety, as much as one of the guys. So evidently that happened in France. One of the doctors, a psychiatrist, and he comes in. He doesn't know what service-related injury OSI looks like, and second, he goes in there and speaks to her in French. It's like the first thing I would have done as a human being is, which language would you like to get addressed in? Because French was a trigger for her as a result of having been in France when this happened. And that's very, very, I'm giving you a surface level overview of the bad situation here, but here's what I have to tell you. I spent 12 hours with her in the ER, convincing her that she did the right thing by staying there. 12 hours, every 20 seconds, I was back to the same thing. Listen, we got to do the hard things so we can get to the better things. We got to do the hard things so we can get to the better things. You stick with it, you do this. And that's a person who has the mentality and the emotional fortitude of an elite performer, right? So imagine if she wasn't, and she was just, you know, somebody experiencing this, there is no way I could have convinced that person to stay.
Right.
So it's all good to tell everybody, reach out, but you better have the resources in place. If they reach out to the Veterans Affairs and are being offered MAID, we know where that could go, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
It's a very important piece that needs to be discussed. And I think I was saying it on that show with Rob, was the fact that if you're going to say reach out, you better be ready to answer that phone, and you better have the skill set and the numbers and the people to call, so that even if you are in a rough spot, you should be able to redirect them to somebody that will.
100%.
But you got to be prepared to do that. And then the second part is, again, if you're going to reach out to other people, like I do, when I will consistently, you know, hey man, how you doing? Hey man, how you doing? Hey, I haven't talked to you in 5 years. What's going on? That kind of stuff. Again, you got to be ready for it. You got to have the skill sets. You got to have something to back it up to actually, and there are courses now. There are lots of things out there that you can take to give yourself the strength, or not just the strength, but the skill set to help someone through those periods of time. Biggest one is, like, be ready to listen. Like, that's one of the easiest things. And you said something earlier that kind of tickled my brain a little bit, was the fact that I had it and then I lost it. Oh man, yeah, it was there, and I was going to go down a road.
Me this time.
Yeah, but I think the biggest challenge when you say reach out, right? And I mentioned this on the show, was when I needed to reach out, when I really needed to reach out, I was really looking at it as I'm unloading excess weight onto other people. So you feel like you're a burden now. You're an inconvenience to somebody else. And we said it on the show. Rob said it on the show. It's like the bigger inconvenience is putting you in a box. And I think that
but there is a tricky line in there.
There is a tricky line, yeah.
And I'm not going to ignore the fact that there's a line in there. And so if someone is reaching out to people for help and now they've turned it into their second career of constantly reaching out to anyone, and now the story that they're reaching out to tell me is the 14th time I've heard the exact same story for yet another hour. And I mean, like, I'll do it, but at some point I'm going to have to say to that individual, hey man, so we've done this a lot, and it's a circle route that we're going to break out of. So how are we going to do this? And if that person is just talking, but not listening, what do you do with that? So we're here to help, but we're not like a sounding board to be constantly talked at for eternity. Something has to pattern interrupt that circle conversation. And so it's a line that has to be delicately walked, but it shouldn't be ignored as a line, is what I'm saying.
100%.
A lot of the workload has to be carried by the person that's hurt. That is a fact. Yeah. And a lot of the workload of getting better is going to be your responsibility and nobody else. But there's going to be people along the way to help you. And the more you work hard, the harder you work, the more people will be there. Because it actually, that feeling of imposing a burden on somebody, if I know that a person is working really hard in a certain field, I'm going to be going out of my way to help them. Because I know that they're pulling their own load.
They're in the game.
The entire load, right?
Yep.
And so the best way to avoid burdening someone, so to speak, because we know it's just a temporary burden, and that person might even give you a burden later in life. So it's going to even out. But what needs to happen is decisive action from the person that's in the position. And if they need help bouncing things off and everything, but once it's done, a course of action has to be set so that steps can be taken to get better, even if they're incremental steps and very small ones. But you need to move in a different direction. You need to break that circle. You need to go in a linear pattern, kind of thing.
That's right. When you were talking, an image of a wheelbarrow popped into my head. I don't know why, but me being the wheelbarrow and someone connecting with me and just wanting to put all their dirt into the wheelbarrow.
But not lift it to carry it.
That's right. That's right. The idea being that wheelbarrow's got to start moving so that you can start getting rid of some of that dirt on a forward trajectory. And that dirt just cannot continuously pile. It breaks the wheelbarrow. The dirt doesn't get any further. Nothing is achieved. So that was just an image.
There's it's funny because I got a completely different image in my head. Is that there's the concept of the slippery slope, right? It's very easy to start sliding down, especially when you're in a negative mindset or you start getting into suicidal ideation or anything like that. You can start going downhill real fast. And what I was imagining was, all of the, if you think of like a slippery slope, like a muddy hill or something like that, and there's roots and branches and things that you can grab on either side, those are all the people that are just sitting there waiting, like with their hand out. Here, just grab on, man. But the key to that is that they have to pull themselves up. At no point is that arm or that branch going to pull you up. You have to pull yourself up, but they are there to hold you in place, basically. And the thing that I've always done, and again, I'm not a doctor by any means, but the thing that has worked for me when I've been talking to people that have been in that situation is upholding a standard. And I don't mean being aggressive and saying, well, you need to be harder, you need to be stronger, you need to blah, blah, blah. You listen to what they say, and then you uphold them to their own standards. I had one particular guy, anytime I kind of push back on him, he would hit me with, but I was this and I was that and I was these things. And I was like, great, now you're king of Crap Mountain. Now what? Where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of it is just like, okay, backstop, we're here. Good. Now what? And you give those people the space to, I know for me, that's what worked really well, was allowing me to have the space to actually process it, because you just feel like you're falling. Everything's falling apart. Oh my God. Oh my God. And you start to panic and you don't know where to look at that point. And a backstop, I think, really, for me, it's helped. It's helped for other people as well, but that's just one tool of many, right? There are all kinds of pieces of information. There's all kinds of courses. There's all kinds of skills that you can go out and get easily if you want to be that person. I think we all should be. I think we should all be seeking to be the person that someone calls when they're in dire straits. I in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think building relationships, strong relationship, legitimate relationship. Basically, if you're not ready to have a genuine relationship with somebody, don't build a relationship. Why are you wasting your time? You got time to waste? Because I don't. And
Yep.
so if you're building legitimate relationship and true meaningful relationship with people, you don't need 17 different courses when that person calls you to reach in for help, because you're that person. You know, you've established your character, you've established your loyalty as a friend, you've established that you're there to help, that you love, that you, whatever the case may be. But you also have to have the ability to have the tougher conversations.
Yeah.
Which are exactly what Shaun was talking about, right?
That's exactly it.
Tough
We got
love
a couple.
is tough, man.
It is. And it's a tough line to walk, right?
Yeah.
It's very easy to send someone over the edge, to go too hard, too fast, too soon.
Yeah.
But it's also really easy to just be accommodating and like let them kind of get away with stuff. So it's
Everyone's got their own velocity.
and that's exactly it. Yeah. We got a couple comments here before we do any final thoughts, but I just want to hit a couple of these because they're fantastic. Gray Man Dad says, I love today's topic. I'm glad we're finally talking about these issues. The way you guys are able to articulate the issue resonates with me. So I appreciate it, Gray Man Dad. Octavian BDS says +1 on what Gray Man Dad said, above the RE the topic and higher articulating. So
Awesome.
it's getting through to some people, which is great.
Amazing, boys.
Pass
it over, pass it on, repost it.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, you know, not getting, so I just want to be careful with that word, not getting through to some people, resonating with some people. And those are two different things. The fellas there, as I read it, they're, you know, they're kind of thinking the same, they're in line, they're synchronized, they're on the same vibe. And we, though we may be articulating it, they are probably thinking it. And so that's the reason that we should be doing these things, is not to teach anyone how to think, but for others to understand that there's more of us that think this way, as my point, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of it. And actually, Octavian BDS says, psychological first aid principle number 1, you can't fix them. You can only support them as they fix themselves. Yes. Active listening is the first step to supporting them, which is exactly what we're talking about. Being open and being understanding that there are other people that are like, oh yeah, okay, good. We can share this around. Make sure that more people either vibe with it, resonate with it, or better understand it. I got the one thing Daniel Lewandowski says is higher emotional education is required in all systems. And I agree with this, but I also think that it's higher emotional education is required in all of us, not the systems.
If you wait for the system to do it, it's never going to happen. So it has to be an individual.
We are the system.
There you go. Exactly.
Change from the inside out. Yeah.
Correct.
That's right. He does give a great point, though. Closer follow-ups in the first year when deployed, first year back, 3, 6, 12 months. I agree with this, and I also, I'm a little contentious with it because I knew exactly what I was supposed to say when I got back from tour to make sure that I didn't have any sort of diagnosis. So, and that will happen quite a bit.
Yeah, it might, unless you're talking to a cool dude. Like if you just sat down across from me and I said, hey, what's up? We got it figured out within a few minutes. It's just the right person at the right time.
Yep. It's tricky when you have a bunch of soldiers walking into the psychologist's office in the behavioral, right?
Yeah.
Like that. That's where it starts to fail. But there are lots of things we can do. There's lots of ways to make it better. And this is how we start. Let's have the conversation, right? Any final thoughts? Anything still burning on the top of your guys' head that we want to get across, Seb?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that there is, we've been looking at men's mental health from a psychological standpoint, and there is also neuroscience behind that. There is also other things. So those things are not to be separated, and that's the reason why some people with occupational stress injury go see the psychologist for 6 years in a row, and there is zero change, because they're addressing some things on a unilateral front. They're not looking at it from all angles and have the professionals help in deciphering what needs to be done where in order to make the totality of the circumstances better.
100%. Yeah. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I like what Seb had going there. And basically, I was paraphrasing it in my mind to the more vectors, the better. Do a 360 on the problem. There's not just one way to do anything. There's so many ways. And part of these conversations should be to encourage everyone to consider things a little outside of the box and see that as we do, consider things a little more broadly, perhaps, so can others. So I like a vectored approach. Thanks, Seb.
Yeah. I've always said, I had a buddy of mine who I was like, man, you should do equine therapy. It would be great for you. He's like, I'm allergic to horses. I was like, well, I guess it's not going to work for you then, right? But there are multiple modalities. You want to start looking into psychedelics, start looking into THC, CBD, start looking into pharmaceuticals, start looking into there are a myriad of ways. Talk therapy, equine, blah, 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 blah. There's millions of things out there. Look them up, try them out. Actively, intentionally look to get better and look for the best way in which you can be better, at least in my mind. Really appreciate the conversation, guys. It has been outstanding. We got lots more to talk about, and as Shaun likes to say, I think we only scratched the surface on this as a topic. Good thing we have all month to talk about it. So
sure is.
We're gonna be talking about this basically all month from a variety of different angles, and that way we can all learn, that way we can all build, that way we can all grow every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.